Hi everyone! This presentation covers Chapter 3, Reviewing the Literature, in the third edition of Jacobsen's textbook, Introduction to Health Research Methods, a Practical Guide. In this chapter, you will learn that reading publications related to the selected research question prepares the researcher to begin designing a new study that will fill a gap in the literature. Here's an outline of the chapter. Section 3.1 covers informal sources. Section 3.2 covers statistical reports. Section 3.3 covers abstract databases. Section 3.4 covers full-text articles. Section 3.5 covers critical reviewing. Section 3.6 covers annotated bibliographies. And Section 3.7 goes over what makes research original. Section 3.1, Informal Sources. So when you have a topic and you're at a starting point, you want to look at some informal sources. These are non-technical documents and other files available on the internet from trusted sources. So these are places like the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the WHO, or WHO, which is our World Health Organization. So these are reports that are put out that are not typically formally peer-reviewed or part of the formal scientific literature, but they can be cited. I know Jacobsen mentions here that they're not usually cited in research papers, but they can sometimes be cited as, say, a fact sheet or a brochure or a website if there isn't a formal research study done on the topic. Section 3.2 goes over statistical reports. These are reports that include things like vital statistics, so population measures of births, deaths, or other demographic characteristics. So an example of this would be the National Vital Statistics System, or it could be state or local websites. So for example, in Texas, we have the Texas Vital Statistics website that has information on births and deaths. Other local, state, national, and international reports that are often used are, say, the American Cancer Society annual reports, Healthy People 2030 reports, the World Bank, World Development Indicators, as well as the World Health Organization's Millennium Development Goals. So these are not technically research studies that you may want to cite within your papers in the future or use towards the development of a research project, but it gives you information about the topic. Section 3.3 covers abstract databases. So what is an abstract? An abstract is a one-paragraph summary of an article, chapter, or book. So this is the whole research paper condensed into a short format of about 150 to 500 words. And an abstract database is a collection of these abstracts, and it allows researchers to search for articles using keywords or other search terms. So in Chapter 2, we discuss keywords and mesh terms, and these are words that you can search for different topics when trying to solidify your research question. And so something like PubMed or CINAHL or Ovid Medline, just to name a few, are an abstract database. And so you would type in a search, and then it gives you back a list of articles that you can look at the abstract of the articles to find out whether or not you want to read more about it. So you may start off and find an abstract and then actually go into finding the full text if you decide that article is of interest to you. So figure 3.1 goes over example of abstract databases. And so like I mentioned before, the PubMed, Ovid Medline, and CINAHL, but here are some other ones. Google Scholar is also listed here. This is a really good way of finding articles, but it's not always linked to the library to get some of those articles. But it is now considered a more reputable source for getting that information. Section 3.4 goes over full text articles. So any type of original research article from primary and secondary research that is published in a peer-reviewed journal is typically a full-text article, so a longer article that goes beyond that abstract. And this is really the best way to fully understand what a study is about, is to read that full text of the article. Now, sometimes you can access those articles through abstract databases, through just a library search engine at UTA. You can go to the library website and literally just type in the title in the search box at the top of the page, and usually it pulls up there. We don't always have the articles there, but it will usually have the article there. If it doesn't, then that's where you may want to go and say look at Google Scholar and go from there. And so there are different articles that you can get open access, freely available online. Otherwise, you may have to go through the library subscription service. And UTA has several different articles, and you just have to make sure that you log in, and then you're able to get those full text articles. Now, if your university does not have the article, then they can usually get it through interlibrary loan. I use this service very often. Anytime there's an article that I cannot get the full text from our library, I will use the interlibrary loan system and be able to get it that way. And they will basically get it from a different library and send you an email so that you can download the article and keep it for your records. If for some reason you're not able to get it in that way, which I've never had a problem doing, you can always contact the author directly. Every time there's a full text article published, there's a corresponding author listed. Now, that person may have moved, may have switched institutions, but you can usually find them. And if it's not their direct email, you can also go through LinkedIn or ResearchGate or any other social media platforms there. So section 3.5 goes over some different steps into critical reading, and this is really when you're reading articles, some things that you want to think about. And so Jacobsen starts off with creating a plan. So there are different ways to go about reading full text articles, but here's what she suggests. So when you get your full text article, you want to reread the abstract. So you probably have already read the abstract in order to determine whether or not you actually want to look at the full text article. Then you can review the figures and tables to determine the most important results. I always look at my methods results, particularly the tables up front, to know if this is something that is of interest and value of me to spend time reading. And then you can read the entire text of the article. And so like I said before, my suggestion really is to start with the methods and results if you're familiar with the topic. But if the topic is new to you and you want some background information, then it's easier to just start off with the beginning, and you can find more information about the field of study there. Then a good thing about reading a full text article is you can review the references. So you can go to the end and actually see all of the different references that are cited in the article, and then you can go and look at those for more information. So figure 3.2 goes over some sample questions for critical reading. And so Jacobsen has some really good questions to keep in mind as you're reading the different sections of the paper. So for example, starting off with the introduction or background, some key questions that you may want to ask yourself is, as you're reading, what was the goal of the study? When you get to the methods, you may want to think about things like, were the methods appropriate for the goal, and were those methods used to collect and analyze data scientifically valid? When you get to the results, you may be thinking, okay, was the main study question answered, and are these results feasible or reasonable, not feasible, because it's already been done. Then when we get to the discussion, have the authors acknowledged and discussed limitations of the study, and have they made comparisons and interpretations of the findings? And then finally, a conclusion, are all the implications and conclusions mentioned in the support, and are those reported results supporting the overall study question? So then Jacobsen also goes over looking at validity when doing critical reading. And there are two different types of validity to make sure you consider: internal validity and external validity. Internal validity is the evidence that a study measured what it's intended to measure. So this is the design, how the study was conducted, how the results were interpreted, and how they were reported. So if you have a sample of students, how well that study was conducted to represent those students. Whereas external validity is the generalizability, the likelihood that the results of the study are internally valid, but then can also be generalized to other populations, places, and times. So if you have a group of students and the study is internally valid, how is that generalizable to other populations of students, say at a different university? Section 3.6 goes over annotated bibliographies. And so when you do a literature review, when you're looking at the literature, it's very, very easy to get stuck in a rabbit hole. You have several different studies, especially if you start looking at the references of those studies. You just end up having all these different literature sources available. And so one way to compile things is to put them into an annotated bibliography. And this is a list of related publications, and this includes at minimum a full reference of each document being reviewed, a brief summary of the article or report, and then notes about the resource's potential relevance to a new study. So I really like to create this as a spreadsheet, and I like to include the author's names, the year, the journal, a very brief summary, and how I want to include this in my study. Other people like to do it in Word. That's fine. It really depends on the project and how it relates to multiple things that I'm doing. So finally, section 3.7 goes over what makes research original. So as you're reviewing the literature, you're reviewing this to decide what research you can contribute as part of the evidence base. And so things that you have to consider are the originality and the gaps in the literature. Originality being that research should be novel and make a unique contribution to the health science literature. And it should fill a gap in what is already out there. And so sometimes students have trouble understanding this grasp, but what you want to understand is that you want to find a way that what you're doing contributes to what has already been published. And so it may be that you're replicating a previous study, but doing it in a new population. Or it may be that you're revising a previous study and looking at the measures that were used, but you ask your questions in a different way. So you want to find some sort of way that what you're doing fills a gap in the literature. And so it should just have at least one substantive difference from previous studies. So it could be a new exposure or disease, or like I said, a new or different population, or even a different perspective. We'll talk about theoretical frameworks later on throughout the textbook. So figure 3.3 goes over some ideas of new studies. So here it breaks down the existing literature at the top, and then it kind of says, okay, well, what you could do is, let's take paper 1 here, and it goes down here. So it could be that you have a new potential risk factor. And so this E2 is looking at a different exposure, but the same disease and the same population. So E1 here has been changed to E2, but the disease is the same and the population is the same. However, it could be that you had the same exposure, but a new disease, but the same population. So E1 is the same, D1 is now D2, and then P1 is the same. Or it could be that you have a new population. So same exposure, E1, same disease, D1, but new population, D3 is listed here. And so here the population 3 is because, say, there are 2 studies already, or actually 3 studies here, but 2 different populations. P1 is in these 2 studies, and then P2 is over there. And so some things that make research original are listed in this section as well. And the first one is replicability, or what is replicability? And this is really when a primary study protocol is implemented in a new study population or setting, and it should generate results similar to the original study. So when you conduct your study, you want to do it in a systematic way, and you want to report it in a way that it could be replicated by someone else. And when it is replicated by someone else, let's say it was in the future, then it would be considered a replication study. So this is anytime a primary research study protocol is repeated in a new population to confirm original findings are not due to chance. Now, when a secondary research study is reanalyzed, it's usually done to benchmark with the original findings. So I've done this before to try and sort of confirm my sample size when I've done secondary research. Okay, so that is it on Chapter 3. Thank you for listening.